If you've ever tried soldering a copper pipe and ended up with a leaky joint, you are far from alone. Most homeowners make the same few mistakes without even realizing it. The first tip on our list is to always heat the fitting, not the pipe. This is the number one mistake I see homeowners make when they pick up a torch for the first time. The fitting is what needs to get hot enough to draw solder in through capillary action. If you point the flame at the pipe instead, you will overheat it, burn off your flux, and end up with a joint that leaks every single time. The second tip is to deburr every single cut, both inside and out. After you cut a piece of copper, there's always a small ridge left behind on the inside edge. That little burr might not look like much, but over time it creates turbulence in the water flow and becomes a starting point for corrosion. Grab a pencil reamer or an inner-outer deburring tool and take about 5 seconds to clean it up. Your pipes will last a whole lot longer. The third tip seems obvious but gets skipped more often than you would think, and that is cleaning your copper with emery cloth before soldering. Solder absolutely will not bond to dirty or oxidized copper. Take a strip of emery cloth or even a Scotch-Brite pad and give the outside of the pipe and the inside of the fitting a good scrub until you see bright, shiny copper. No shine means no seal. Now, if you're finding this video helpful so far, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps this video reach more homeowners like yourself who would also find this information helpful. All right, let's continue. The fourth tip is to use a proper tube cutter instead of a hacksaw. A hacksaw leaves a rough, angled cut that makes it nearly impossible to get a clean fit inside a coupling or elbow. A tube cutter gives you a perfectly square, clean cut every time. Just tighten it a little with each rotation and let the blade do the work. Do not over-tighten, or you will deform the pipe and create the same problem you were trying to avoid. The fifth tip is one that involves your local plumbing code, and that is to always use lead-free solder on potable water lines. Lead solder has been banned on drinking water lines across the United States since 1986, but it is still sold for heating and drainage applications. Always check the label on your solder roll before you start. Using the wrong one on a water supply line is a code violation and a health hazard for your family. The sixth tip is to apply flux sparingly and only where it actually counts. A lot of folks think more flux means a better joint, but the opposite is true. Excess flux that gets pushed inside the pipe during assembly becomes corrosive over time and eats away at the copper from the inside. Apply a thin, even coat to the outside of the pipe and the inside of the fitting, and that is all you need. The seventh trick is one of the oldest in the plumbing trade, and that is the bread trick for stopping residual drips when soldering. If you have just a tiny bit of water still trickling inside the pipe, take a piece of plain white bread with the crust removed and push it into the pipe as far as you can. It acts as a temporary plug so you can solder the joint. The bread dissolves in the water and flushes out the nearest fixture. Just remember to remove your aerators first. The eighth tip is to make absolutely sure you drain and dry your pipes completely before soldering. Even the smallest amount of moisture inside the line will turn to steam, push the solder right out of the joint, and leave you with a leak. Shut off the water, open several fixtures to break the vacuum, and let everything drain. If you still have a stubborn drip, that is when you use the bread trick from number 7. The 9th tip is also all about safety, and that is to use a flame protector cloth whenever you're soldering near anything combustible. Wood framing, insulation, and drywall can catch fire faster than you think when a torch flame hits them. These flame protector cloths are dirt cheap at any hardware store. Pin one up with a couple of thumbtacks behind your work area, and you have a fireproof barrier between your torch and the house. The 10th tip is a small step that makes a big difference, and that is to mark the insertion depth on the pipe before you assemble anything. Every fitting has a specific depth that the pipe needs to slide into for a proper joint. Take a marker or a scratch awl and make a line on the pipe at that depth. When you push the pipe into the fitting, that mark tells you it is fully seated. No guessing involved. The 11th tip is to use a fitting brush for the inside of every single fitting. Emery cloth is great for the outside of the pipe, but it cannot properly clean the inside socket of a coupling or an elbow. A wire fitting brush is sized to match your pipe diameter and scrubs out oxidation and debris in seconds. This is one of those steps that separates a joint that holds from one that leaks at 2 in the morning. The 12th tip is a real lifesaver when you're working in tight spaces, and that is to use a mini tube cutter. A standard tube cutter needs room to swing around the pipe, and sometimes you just do not have it, especially between floor joists or close to a wall. A mini cutter fits in spaces as small as 1 inch of clearance and still gives you a clean square cut every time. Tip number 13 is a knowledge one, and that is to know your copper types. There are 3 main types you will run into: Type M, Type L, and Type K. Type M is the thinnest and is commonly used in residential water supply. Type L is thicker and often required by code in certain areas. Type K is the heaviest and typically used underground. Always check your local code before buying your materials. The 14th tip is to use a dielectric union whenever you are connecting copper pipe to galvanized steel. When 2 different metals touch each other in a plumbing system, a chemical reaction called galvanic corrosion starts eating away at both metals. A dielectric union creates a barrier between them and stops that reaction completely. Skip this step, and you could be looking at a corroded, leaking connection within just a few years. The 15th tip is one a lot of beginners overlook, and that is to do a dry run before you solder anything. Cut all your pieces. Assemble everything without flux or solder, and make sure it all fits together perfectly. This is where you catch measurement errors, misaligned fittings, or a piece that is just a hair too short. It takes a few extra minutes up front, but saves you from having to cut out and redo a bad joint later. Number 16 is to protect nearby finished joints with a wet rag when you are soldering close to them. When you have 2 fittings right next to each other, the heat from your torch can travel through the copper and reopen the joint you already completed. Wrap a soaking wet cotton rag around the finished joint to act as a heat sink. It draws the heat away and keeps your completed work intact. Tip number 17 is about proper support, and that is to support your copper pipes every 6 to 8 feet. Copper is strong, but it is not rigid enough to span long distances without sagging over time. Unsupported runs put stress on the joints and eventually cause cracks and leaks. Use copper or plastic hangers. And make sure you never use galvanized straps directly against copper, or you will get corrosion. The 18th tip is to keep push-fit fittings on hand for emergency repairs. Brands like Sharkbite make fittings that slide right onto copper pipe with no solder, no flux, and no torch. They are not always the best long-term solution for every situation, but when you have a burst pipe at midnight and water spraying everywhere, a push-fit coupling will stop the leak in seconds and buy you time to do a proper repair later. Tip number 19 is a simple rule that a lot of people break, and that is to let your solder joints cool naturally. Never hit a freshly soldered joint with a wet rag or splash water on it to speed things up. The sudden temperature change causes micro cracks in the solder that you cannot see, but they will show up as a slow drip days or weeks later. Just be patient and let it cool on its own. The 20th tip is to use MAP gas instead of propane when you are working with larger diameter copper. Propane works fine for 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch pipe, but once you get up to 1 inch or larger, it struggles to bring the fitting up to temperature evenly. MAP gas burns significantly hotter and gets those bigger fittings to soldering temperature faster, giving you a cleaner and more reliable joint. The 21st trick is to use a spring tube bender when working with soft copper tubing. Soft copper comes in coils and is commonly used for refrigeration lines and ice maker connections. If you try to bend it by hand, it will kink and collapse. And once it kinks, that section is ruined. Slide a spring bender over the tubing before you bend it, and it supports the walls of the pipe all the way through the curve. Number 22 is the oldest rule in the book, and that is to measure twice and cut once. With copper prices being what they are right now, every wasted piece costs you real money. Take your measurement, mark it clearly, double check it, and only then make your cut. It sounds basic, but even after 30 years, I still catch myself about to cut a piece too short when I rush. The 23rd tip is to understand the difference between compression fittings and soldered joints. Compression fittings use a brass ring called a ferrule and 2 nuts to create a seal without any heat. They're great for accessible locations like under sinks where you might need to disconnect later. Soldered joints are stronger and better for permanent installations inside walls. Knowing when to use each one saves you headaches and callbacks. Tip 24 is about how you hang your copper, and that is to always use copper or plastic straps instead of galvanized ones. Just like with dielectric unions, putting galvanized metal directly against copper starts that galvanic corrosion process. Over the years, the pipe will develop green buildup and eventually weaken right where the strap sits. Copper straps or coated plastic hangers eliminate this problem entirely and keep your installation clean. The 25th tip is one that will save you a massive headache down the road, and that is to install isolation valves at key points in your plumbing system. Adding a shutoff valve before each toilet, sink, and water heater means you can turn off water to one fixture without shutting down the whole house. Ball valves are the best choice here because they give you full flow and rarely seize up over time. Number 26 is a technique the pros use called pre-tinning, and it is a game changer for stubborn or hard-to-reach joints. Before you assemble the fitting, apply flux and heat the pipe end on its own. Then touch solder to it and let a thin layer coat the surface. Do the same inside the fitting. When you put them together and reheat, the 2 pre-tinned surfaces bond quickly and reliably, even in awkward positions. The 27th tip is a simple upgrade that makes soldering safer and more convenient. and that is to use a self-igniting torch. These torches have a built-in trigger that lights the flame instantly without needing a separate striker or lighter. That keeps one hand free to hold the pipe or fitting in place. And it means you are not fumbling around with a striker while a gas valve is open. Tip number 28 is one you absolutely should not skip, and that is to pressure test every single joint before you close up a wall. Once drywall goes up, a hidden leak can cause thousands of dollars in damage before you even notice it. Connect a pressure test gauge to the line. Bring it up to about 60 pounds per square inch with air or water, and watch the gauge for at least 15 minutes. If it holds, you are good to go. The 29th tip is about fixing pinhole leaks without replacing an entire section of pipe. If you find a small pinhole in a straight run, you can cut out just the damaged inch or two and splice in a short piece of new copper using 2 couplings. Or for an even faster fix, use a push-fit repair coupling that slides right over the damaged spot. Either way, you do not need to rip out 3 feet of pipe for a tiny hole. Tip number 30 is to always use a pipe reamer after every single cut. Even if you use a tube cutter and got a nice clean cut, there's still a slight inner lip where the cutting wheel pressed into the copper. That tiny ridge restricts water flow and creates a catch point for debris. Most quality tube cutters have a built-in reamer that folds out from the body. Use it every time, no exceptions. The 31st tip is one that a lot of homeowners miss, and that is to leave expansion room on long, hot water runs. Copper expands when it heats up, and on a straight run of 10 feet or more, that expansion adds up. Without room to move, the pipe pushes against fittings and joints and can crack them over time. Professional plumbers build in small offsets or expansion loops that give the pipe room to grow and shrink naturally. Number 32 is about proper solder feeding technique, and that is to always feed your solder at the joint and not into the flame. When the fitting is hot enough, touch the solder wire to the seam where the pipe meets the fitting. Capillary action will pull the solder right into the joint and fill it completely. If you stick the solder into the flame instead, it just melts and drips onto the floor without bonding to anything. The 33rd tip is to use a turbo or swirl flame tip on your torch for more even heat distribution. A standard tip shoots a concentrated flame at one spot, which means you have to keep moving it around the fitting to heat it evenly. A turbo tip wraps the flame around the fitting so the whole thing heats up at the same rate. This is especially helpful on 3/4 inch and 1 inch fittings. Tip number 34 is a subtle technique that makes a real difference, and that is to rotate the pipe slightly when inserting it into a hot fitting. Give it a gentle quarter turn as you push it in. This spreads the solder and flux evenly around the entire inside of the joint, eliminating any dry spots that could become a leak point. It only takes a second, and it helps ensure full coverage every time. The 35th tip is about how you sand your copper, and that is to always sand in the direction of the pipe, never against it. Sanding across the pipe creates tiny cross-grain scratches that can act as channels for water to seep through the solder. Long, smooth strokes along the length of the pipe create a surface that solder bonds to cleanly and completely with no weak paths for water to follow. Number 36 is a practical planning tip, and that is to keep a small supply of spare couplings and common fittings on hand at all times. Nothing kills your momentum on a project like having to stop, drive to the hardware store, and come back for one fitting you forgot. Pick up a handful of 1/2-inch and 3/4-inch couplings, elbows, and T's the next time you're at the store. They are cheap, and they will save you a trip. The 37th tip is to use a copper pipe straightener when working with coiled soft copper tubing. Soft copper comes in rolls, and unrolling it leaves you with a wavy, curved mess that is tough to work with. A pipe straightener clamps onto the tubing and rolls it straight in one pass. If you do not have a straightener, you can carefully work it by hand on a flat surface, but the tool does it in a fraction of the time. Tip number 38 is to know how to deal with water hammer in your copper lines. Water hammer is that loud banging sound you hear when a valve shuts off quickly and the water pressure has nowhere to go. Over time, those shock waves stress your joints and fittings. The fix is simple. Install a water hammer arrestor near the offending valve. It absorbs the pressure spike and keeps your copper pipes quiet and safe. Number 39 is a common mistake that catches a lot of beginners, and that is using pipe dope on soldered connections. Pipe dope is designed for threaded fittings only. If you apply it to a joint that you are about to solder, it contaminates the connection and prevents the solder from bonding properly. Use flux on soldered joints and save your pipe dope for threaded connections. Mixing them up is a guaranteed way to create a leak. The 40th and final tip on our list is to always check your local code requirements before you start any copper pipe project. Plumbing codes vary from state to state and even from county to county. What is perfectly acceptable in one area might require an inspection or a different material in another. A quick call to your local building department can save you from having to tear out finished work because it does not meet code. And now for the bonus tip that professional plumbers swear by. Before you start any soldering job, take a permanent marker and write the word "open" on every valve in your work area that needs to stay open. This sounds almost too simple, but on bigger jobs with multiple shut-off valves, it is incredibly easy to accidentally close one that should be open or forget which direction is which. Professional plumbers mark every valve before they start, because one closed valve in the wrong spot means trapped water in the line, which means your solder joint will fail no matter how perfectly you heated it. A $2 marker and 10 seconds of labeling can save you an hour of frustration and wasted materials. Thanks for sticking with me through the entire video. If you found this helpful, give it a like, subscribe for more DIY plumbing tips, and check out our other videos.